Hello folks! In this series we will be making a pumpkin texture in Substance Designer. Then we will go over creating a pumpkin mesh in Houdini as well as creating a fully procedural candle. In the end we will go in Unreal Engine 5 and make a basic setup for our pumpkin material and our candle material. Let's start with creating our pumpkin texture. Here is the whole substance graph. It's not really big or complicated. So let's first, I'll just disable everything here and start from scratch. I'm removing my color and my roughness. Then I'll just disable all the nodes that I have. And you can just click Shift D, which will disable the selected nodes. And that's what we have. But first, let's set it to a sphere with two tiles. And in the materials, go to default edit. And let's push the height scale a little bit so we can see what's happening. And a tessellation factor. So that's what we have now. And first, we have a gradient linear 3, which we simply rotate it to 90 degrees. Then we have a tile generator. Then we want to make this smoother, so we do a non-uniform blur. And that's what we get now. And we blur it by the inverted value of what we have here. This way, those bottom pieces will get blurred. See? That's what we are after here. Then we have a simple non-uniform blur to smooth out the really hard edges here. Then an overall blur to blend the shapes a little bit more together. And this is an optional directional blur, which will smooth everything even more. And then we have a slope blur. Let's say I just make a new one, a blur HQ grayscale. So we get something like that. But this is super strong. We want to push the shapes together, but not as much. So we can go with a really low value. I had 3 before, so let's see how this goes. Now this is looking more like the pumpkin that we actually want to see in the end. Then I noticed that pumpkins aren't really that smooth, so we want to add a little bit of variety there, and we just have a blend set to modify, and this is what happens if it's at the maximum blend. We don't want that much, so it's 0.3, 0.4 maybe, and here we just have a Berlin noise set to scale 6. And here we split off the graph a little bit, and we want to achieve those inner ridges that all the gradients here have. And to achieve that, first I simply copied the tile generator, and mostly I just played with the values a little bit. And since I have this set to scale, I have to make this smaller. And I always miss this. Actually, it's the size absolute, like that. And as you can see here, there's some angle variety, which is the rotation random, like let's say with 0.01, so with extreme, but 0.003 maybe. Yeah, is something better. And of course, again, we don't want them to have this hard edge, so we just do a non-uniform blur. And maybe I should disable that so we can see what's happening. Yeah, we have that, which is a super hard edge. We do a non-uniform blur. Now this is smooth. Then we do a directional blur, and this will blend it even better. Then we have a swope blur grayscale. We just want to add some irregular forms to those shapes. This is just a Berlin noise. You can just use any scale, disorder, whatever. And then a neat little trick that I always use to save performance and to add a little bit more variety. We can just get a transform, flip it, move it a little bit, and then we will use that. So it's cheap and we have a different noise. We just do an overlay, and now to really see the effect you have to set it to max, but we don't really want that because later we will be using that height to make the actual mesh, and we don't want to have too much noisiness. So a 0.3, 0.2 is fine. And this is almost the whole graph. We then have an auto levels just to push the values, and just for a bit more randomness, there's a non-uniform directional warp with a Berlin noise again, and this is to really push the bigger shapes. We aren't really adding any high frequency or medium frequency detail yet. And then, as pumpkins are kind of squashed at both ends, at least some kinds of pumpkins, we just have a gradient linear 2 and a histogram scan, which you can see I pumped the contrast a little bit just to cut it off here. But honestly, as long as you're happy with it, you can totally change that and make something like that for say. And this thing is our base. Everything that comes after it is just adding even more details to our texture. Then we go off and add some extra bouging shapes. I'll just disable that. And what do we have here? If we set it to max, you can see how we break up the form. And the only thing here is a tile generator. We are using that shape. We have random scale, offset, random position, random. Honestly, anything goes here. And we just blur it a little bit so the shapes blend better together. If we don't have that, we'll see like it's a sales noise, and we don't really want a sales noise. We just want some variance in our height map. Then I'm using a histogram range just to push our height down a little bit, so we have more room to add on top of it, because here we are really close to being entirely white, and we can't add anything on top of it. And here's the first fun part. We add a little bit of detail, and this is organic veins, let's call it. We start it, let's disable everything here so we can see it step by step. We started off with a directional noise 2, and it's just rotated at 90 degrees. Then we do a non-uniform blur to remove that really high frequency noise. Then we do a multi-directional warp. This is just to make it conform a little better to our shapes. Then we do a directional warp to add even more detail. And then we have a swope blur grayscale blurring with the blurred previous input. And what this does is this pushes the shapes closer together. And if we don't have that, you can see what we have here. And we get more defined shapes with that. Then we have even more veins. Now I'll disable that to see. We added even more details. And this is set to a really low value of 0.003. We don't want too much noise here because this is still going into the height map, and we will be using that to create a mesh. If set to maximum, this is what we get, and we don't really want that. And what do we have here? Again, I have disabled everything. We have a directional noise 2 again, a multi-directional warp with our previous noise. We have a directional warp again, and a swope for grayscale again. Basically, I just copied over this whole section and I tweaked it a little bit to change it. Then we have almost exactly the same thing again. Let's see what kind of detail this will add. And if we push it really hard, you can see that we have some bigger, chunkier shapes that aren't really that blurry. This kind of looks like wood. And let's turn it back to 0.04. And let's see what this is. This is a directional noise 4. We are warping it with our base pumpkin height, so just so it follows it a little bit. Then we have another multi-directional warp. You can even skip that, just a little bit of warping, then the directional warp with clouds 2, and again a swope blur grayscale. This is everything. And of course, if we want to be really performant, we can use the same clouds noise and not have different noises. You can Alt click to make dots so your graph is organized, and then you can just clean it like that. So we saved a couple of noises, which is good always. Then we have this small dents, more like holes. So we start with this super cool noise, grunge spots, and I have the coverage set to maximum. We then warp it with the base pumpkin shape. We then warp it again, which this is totally optional. We can ignore one of those. I just wanted the warp to go into two different directions. A non-uniform blur, which changes the shape. Then a blur HQ grayscale just to make those edges smoother. A swope blur grayscale to push the shapes in a little bit, as you can see. And we then just blend that onto our base shape. And here we have a Berlin noise with a histogram scan just to add a little bit of randomness to it. Otherwise, those will be all over the pumpkin. Then we have the big chunky veins, and here we can see what that is all about. Now this is some really great variety, which was missing until now. You can see if we push this even more. Now this is starting to look more interesting. And how do we make that? Well, it's kind of like all the previous noises. We started with a directional noise 4. We do a non-uniform blur, a multi-directional warp twice, and here you can see that even the warp angle is the same, but this you can just change it. It doesn't matter that much. Then we have the directional warp again, and as you can see, all those I kind of just copied over and started tweaking until I liked something. Now this is something that we still haven't done, so this is a really nice technique that I often use. We get a swope blur grayscale. We then do an invert on our noise and then blur it. We set the blur to be low, like 0.5, and we connect that. So of course we don't get anything here, but we set the samples to maximum and the intensity to something really low, and you can see this super cool noise that we are now getting. And here we have the intensity set to 0.28. If you click D, the nodes collapse. And let's see, 0.28. See what's happening to our shapes now? But of course, we don't want those super harsh edges. So we will start with a non-uniform directional warp to add even more variety. and then a non-uniform blur grayscale. And this will smooth out those super hard edges. And just to add a little bit more variety here, we do a non-uniform directional warp at the end. Maybe the more important thing here is that it's set to average, and we have a trail length set to maximum, which just carries over the noise as it moves. Then we start adding some extra fine details. Like you have to be real close to see that. And we have a directional noise tool, warping with a clouds tool, and a directional warp with our base height, just so it conforms to the shape. And we have a clouds with a histogram scan, just to add even more variety. And then I wanted to have some more dents or some more holes, but I wanted them to be only facing up, just adding a little bit of noise, but to the faces that are facing up. So we get a normal, we do an RGBA split, and here I'm just blurring, inverting, and A levels to get all the shapes that are facing up. So basically we have that, but depends on if you're using OpenGL or DirectX. Your up will be different. In our case, we have to flip it. And here we are just picking out our up-facing shapes, and to make that smoother and not have that much lone pixels, we just blur it. So that's what we have here. Then on all the levels that isn't really needed, so I just remove it, and this is our mask here. Then we are adding even more high frequency detail. See those little dots that are maybe dust, maybe it's just something more irregular on the pumpkin surface, but we blend it using a screen. And this is just a tile generator with the amount set to 128, and we are using a simple shape here. Adding randomness to everything, I won't go over all the details, then just a little bit of blur and a directional warp to conform to the shape better. But don't go too crazy with that, because then it will look more like pixels or streaks instead of actual dots. And then on all the levels again to get our full values. I think this is the final thing that we want to make here. You can add a little bit of dirt, see those? Or maybe it's chips in the pumpkin surface, whatever suits your given reference. I had a lot of different references here, so this is just dirt, but we don't really want to push it that high, so we are keeping it to 0.02 or something like that. We simply have a clouds tool, a non-uniform directional warp. We then warp it with our pumpkin's base height. And here I'm just making some mask that here, just using the clouds tool and the warped clouds tool, I'm just moving it around a little bit. And this serves as our mask. Time to go over and make our cover finally. And here I have my cover ready. This is what this demo pumpkin looks like. And how did we achieve that? First, I'll disable all the nodes here. We don't want that. So yeah, we start with that. Here we have a normal, and we want to keep our masks normal different from our normal that goes out, since if we expose that one and the user tweaks it, and if it's connected here, all of our masks will change, and we don't want that. We want our masks to stay constant. See, so if this is the user, our cover will be totally different depending on the intensity of the normal that they input. So we have normal, and we create our masks using a curvature smooth, a facing normal, and an ambient occlusion. To get the masks for the facing normal and the AO, we just do an invert grayscale. And for the curvature smooth, we split it up into a histogram select and several gradient maps. First, we create our base color. We just pick a gradient and just find a really nice reference and use that. Then we use this blend here, which doesn't do anything right now, and that is because it is using this top to bottom color gradient. A lot of my references had this color that is coming from the pumpkin stem at the top, and this control here will actually show us what is happening. It is something like that. And in order to create that, I just have several different noises. We have a Qualts 2, a Qualts 1, and a Perlin noise. I move the Qualts 2 a little bit. I do a non-uniform grayscale. You can see how everything is connected here, and another non-uniform grayscale to get that noise. We then do a multi-directional warp with a gradient linear 1 to get our gradient going from top to bottom. We do a histogram scan, which is our final control, and a multi-directional warp at the end just to break it up a little bit, and the breaking actually comes in this gradient here. Now we have something that is showing at the bottom, but that is really wow. You can play around it if you want. The simplest thing that you could do if you really don't want that there, simply do a blend and start cropping. And in this case, we just want to crop from top. And this way, you won't have the gradient at the bottom, which is actually better. So we can just keep it. And this fits into the blend of the cover. Here we don't really have anything special. Again, just pick a gradient from some reference or anything that you like. And I'm adding a little bit of variety here using a noise. And I'm just using this same noise here. We can totally make an entirely new one. Then we are getting the edges from our curvature smooth with a histogram select. You can also do that with a histogram scan. It doesn't really matter, whatever feels better. And with a histogram scan, we are still getting those edges. And on HSL, we just pumped the whiteness a little bit. Then we are taking the crevices, which again, a histogram select connecting to the curvature smooth. Then adding that dirt shape, which we created here. And this dirt shape is again an HSL, and the whiteness here is really pumped, but we can tweak it using the blend parameter. We have some dirt. If you see a lot of pumpkin references, you will see that in those areas, they are really dusty, and they even have soil there. And to get that, we are using the facing normal with the invert grayscale and the histogram scan. And here is our soil or dirt parameter color. Then we are adding those little spots that we have as a separate color. Then we are finally adding the dust in the big crevices. And this time we are using this uniform color with an HSL, which is set to a little bit darker. And then we have our AO just multiplied on top. This is just to make the shapes pop even more. You can skip that if you don't like it, but usually this brings out the shapes even more. Just don't go completely dark because this doesn't look good. And that's it about the cover. About the roughness, let's see if we switch it like that. And I really don't want this AO so strong. So yeah, we have our final pumpkin here, but let's see how the roughness was created. I will disable all of those connections, so we just start from something. And here we have three different roughness parameters. This will be our base pumpkin roughness. This will be our gradient that is a different color, and I wanted that to be way smoother. And then we have this dirt shape mask here, and we usually want sand or dirt to be with a higher value so it isn't as smooth as everything else. Then we also add our AO, but we first flip it and then we add it with screen. Then here we have the super tiny shapes. We don't want them to be smooth at all, so we just set it to a maximum of 1. Then we add that noise here, and where is this coming from? This is our curvature, and those are our edges again. So the same thing that here gives us those whiter colors also give us our glossier colors here. Now, this is totally up to your own personal pumpkin and to your own choice. Then we add even more details, and those are the dusty spots. We don't want them to be smooth again. And finally, those thick crevices, we add them again with screen because we don't want them to be smooth. And at the end, this is our final pumpkin. Here I have something for my own personal project where I am packing all the maps together, and you don't have to do that, of course. These are your final outputs. And from here, we will jump over to Houdini to make the actual pumpkin meshes using our height that we just now created. Thanks for watching.